JP Morgan just put a number on it. 40% chance of recession by the end of 2025. Not some fringe analyst, not a pessimistic blogger. One of the world's largest financial institutions just told you that there's nearly a coin flip's chance the economy implodes within months. And the reaction? Silence. Markets keep climbing. Economists keep talking about soft landings. Everyone keeps pretending this is normal. But here's the thing. This isn't about tariffs. It's not about whoever's in office. This is about a pattern. A four-stage economic pattern that's been playing out for centuries across nations, across currencies, across every major financial system that's ever existed. And right now in December 2025, we're watching the final stage unfold in real time. Look at the numbers for just a second. Global debt is sitting at $251 trillion. Government debt alone jumped over $8 trillion in the past year to $111 trillion. The United States, $38 trillion in national debt, growing by roughly $6 billion every single day. The interest payments on that debt hit $981 billion in October. That's more than we spend on defense. More than Medicare, just interest payments. You know what's wild? None of this is surprising, not if you understand the pattern. Because this exact same thing has happened before, multiple times, and every single time people thought they were special. They thought their situation was different, they thought they could escape the math. They were wrong every time. So, let me walk you through how this works. The pattern has four stages, four inevitable steps that transform prosperity into crisis. Stage one is the foundation. A nation establishes credibility. Sound money, maybe backed by gold, maybe backed by economic dominance. The currency becomes trusted. Trade flows, wealth grows, everything works. Stage two is where it gets interesting. Governments realize they can print money, they've got a war to fight or social programs to fund or political promises to keep. And printing money is so much easier than raising taxes. So, they do it. The money supply explodes while actual productivity can't keep up. But hey, it works. For a while, stage three is loss of control. Inflation starts running hot, foreign nations start getting nervous about holding your currency, and suddenly you're facing an impossible choice. Keep printing and risk hyperinflation or stop printing and watch your economy collapse. There's no good answer. That's the point. You've already lost. In stage four, that's where you are right now. Either hyperinflation destroys the currency or massive recession destroys the economy. Pick your poison. The machine always breaks. The only question is how loud the crash will be. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like theory, like some academic exercise. So, let me show you this pattern in action. Let me show you what happens when a nation enters stage 4. Germany, 1918. World War I just ended. The country is drowning in debt. The Treaty of Versailles comes down in 1919 demanding massive reparations payable in gold-backed currency. Germany doesn't have the gold, they don't have the money, but they need to function as a country. So what do? They print. August 1921, the German central bank starts buying hard cash with paper currency. They claim it's to pay the reparations. Really, it's just to keep the government running. And at first, it seems fine. $1 buys about 300 marks in mid-1922. 6 months later, that same dollar buys over 7,000 marks. Prices increasing 17 times over in half a year. Then France and Belgium occupy the Ruhr Valley in January 1923. Germany's industrial heartland. The government orders everyone to strike. 2 million workers stop cooperating, and the government has to pay those striking workers somehow, so they print more money. Loss of control isn't coming. It's already here. By November 1923, $1 is worth over 4 trillion German marks, and a loaf of bread costs 200 billion marks. Workers get paid at the start of their shift and run to spend it before the end of their shift because prices are rising that fast. Unemployment hits 28%. The middle class, the backbone of society, gets completely wiped out, and 10 years later, people who lived through that elected the Nazi Party. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when money becomes worthless. But maybe you're thinking, okay, that's Germany, that's ancient history, extreme circumstances. Let's talk about something more recent, something that involved the United States, Bretton Woods. 44 nations get together and create a new global monetary system. Everyone pegs their currency to the US dollar. The dollar is backed by gold at $35 an ounce. America holds the world's largest gold reserves. For 25 years, this creates unprecedented growth. The dollar becomes the global reserve currency. Everything's great until the 1960s. Vietnam War, President Johnson's Great Society programs, massive government spending, and instead of raising taxes or cutting other programs, the US just prints more dollars. By the late 60s, there are way more dollars in circulation than gold in reserve. The math doesn't work anymore. France figures this out first. President de Gaulle in 1965 announces he's converting France's dollar reserves to gold. Other nations start demanding the same. In August 1971, Britain requests $3 billion in gold. Switzerland leaves the system on August 9th. On August 13th, President Nixon meets secretly at Camp David with his economic advisors. They've got a choice: honor the gold redemption and watch America's gold vanish in weeks, or close the gold window and break the promise to every nation holding dollars. August 15th, 1971. Nixon goes on TV. The gold window closes. The Bretton Woods system dies instantly. Treasury Secretary John Connolly tells foreign ministers, the dollar is our currency, but it's your problem. And then stage 4 hits the entire 1970s. Stagflation, unemployment, over 6%. Inflation explodes past 13% by 1980. Gold goes from $35 an ounce to over $800. A 23-fold increase. Real wages stop growing. Before 1971, median income could buy a home in about 2.5 years. Today, over 7 years. The dollar has lost roughly 87% of its purchasing power since Nixon closed that gold window. Worker productivity kept rising, but wages flattened. The middle class has been hollowing out ever since. One more example, because I want you to see this clearly: the British Empire. For over a century, Britain maintains the gold standard. The pound sterling is the world's reserve currency. British economic dominance is absolute. Then World War I shatters everything. Britain borrows heavily, suspends the gold standard, prints money. In 1925, they try to return to the gold standard at the pre-war rate, but it's artificial. The money supply has already expanded too much. The Great Depression in 1929 exposes the weakness. Britain can't maintain the gold standard and domestic stability at the same time. September 1931, they abandon gold permanently. The pound collapses. International confidence evaporates. Britain never recovers its position as the global superpower. The empire starts its terminal decline. By 1944, at Bretton Woods, it's not Britain writing the rules, it's America. The pattern completed. Sound money to expansion to loss of control to irreversible decline. 3 examples, 3 different eras. The exact same 4-stage mechanism. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave America? In December 2025, Stage 1 happened decades ago. The US established dominance after Bretton Woods, then absolute dominance after the Nixon shock in 1971. The dollar became the undisputed global reserve currency. Done. Stage 2, monetary expansion. Look at the trajectory. US national debt was 5 trillion in 1996, 10 trillion by 2008, 20 trillion in 2017, 30 trillion in 2022, 38 trillion right now. That's 13 trillion added in just 8 years. During that same period, GDP only grew by 8 trillion. The government is borrowing faster than the economy is growing. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded from under a trillion before 2008 to 9 trillion at its peak after COVID. Every crisis for 2 decades has been solved the same way: print more money. Stage 3 is where it gets real. That's where we are right now. JP Morgan's chief economist raised their recession probability from 30 to 40%, citing disruptive policies and extreme measures. They calculate current tariff policies amount to a 430 billion tax hike on American households and businesses. That's 1.4% of GDP. That's comparable to the tax increases that financed the Vietnam War. And Goldman Sachs says 45% recession probability. Morgan Stanley says 40%. The IMF raised their estimate from 25 to 40%. These aren't doomsayers. These are the world's largest financial institutions doing the math. Interest payments on US debt now exceed defense spending. They exceed Medicare. They consume nearly 14% of all federal spending. And that percentage is forecast to rise. More money going to service debt than to any single discretionary program. The government faces the same impossible choice every nation at stage 3 faces: print more money to service the debt and risk accelerating inflation, or cut spending and risk recession and unrest. There's no good answer. That's the trap. You're already in stage 3 and stage 4. It's starting right now. JP Morgan projects US GDP will expand by just 0.25% in the second half of 2025. That's not growth, that's stagnation. They warned that if current policies continue, they'll likely push the US and possibly the global economy into recession this year. They had global recession probability at 60% before recent adjustments brought it back to 40. But here's the critical thing: they didn't eliminate the risk, they just bought some time. The pattern doesn't stop, the mechanism doesn't reverse. Global debt rose over 8 trillion last year alone. The global fiscal deficit averages 5% of GDP. China's debt jumped 2 trillion this year. Japan's debt to GDP ratio is at 230%. The European Union is facing simultaneous banking and sovereign debt crises. This isn't just an American problem, this is the global financial system following the pattern to its conclusion. Now, let me guess the objections running through your head right now. America's different. We're exceptional. No, Britain thought it was exceptional. The British Empire lasted centuries. The pound was the world's reserve currency for over 100 years. They had the largest navy, the most powerful military, the most advanced economy. None of it mattered. When the pattern completed, Britain declined. The American century lasted from 1945 to right now. We're watching it end. The dollar's dominance rests entirely on other nations' willingness to hold dollars. That willingness isn't guaranteed, it's not permanent. China and Russia are already conducting trade in other currencies. The moment the world stops needing dollars is the moment America loses its privilege. That process has already started. Technology changes everything. Modern economics makes old patterns obsolete. Does it though? Germany in the 1920s had some of the world's most advanced industrial technology. Didn't save them from hyperinflation. The US in 2008 had the most sophisticated financial system ever created. Risk models, derivatives, algorithmic trading. None of it prevented the financial crisis. Actually made it worse because the complexity hid the risk. The fundamental equation hasn't changed. If you borrow more than you can repay, if you print more money than your economy produces in goods, you face a reckoning. Computers don't change that. AI doesn't change that. Crypto doesn't change that. The pattern persists because it's based on human behavior and mathematical limits, not on technology. Central banks have learned how to manage this. Have they? The Federal Reserve has existed since 1913. In that time, we've had the Great Depression, the 70s stagflation, the dot-com bubble 2008, and the COVID crash. Every time the Fed's solution is the same: lower rates, print money, push the problem into the future, and make it bigger. The Fed's balance sheet went from under $1 trillion in 2007 to $9 trillion at peak. That's not management. That's desperation. Paul Volcker, the guy who actually broke inflation in the early 80s, did it by raising rates to 20% and accepting a brutal recession. Modern central banks don't have the courage or the political support to do that again. When the next crisis hits, they've got one tool left: print more money. And that's the final stage of the pattern. Here's what you need to understand. This pattern isn't a prediction, it's an observation of mathematical inevitability. When debt exceeds the ability to service it, something breaks. When money supply exceeds productivity, purchasing power collapses. When foreign creditors lose confidence, reserve currency status disappears. These aren't political opinions, these are economic realities that have repeated across every major economy in modern history. The United States isn't special. The dollar isn't magical. The system is following the pattern. JP Morgan's 40% recession probability isn't a guess. It's a mathematical assessment of how close we are to the breaking point. We're in stage 3, entering stage 4. What happens next isn't uncertain. It's inevitable. The only questions are timing and severity. So, what do? You can't stop the pattern. You can't vote it away. You can't reform it from within. But you can position yourself to survive it. You can understand what assets maintain value when currencies collapse. You can study what happened to people who preserved wealth through Weimar, through the Nixon shock, through every previous completion of this cycle. The machine was built over decades. It can't be stopped in months, but it can be understood. This video showed you the pattern. And the next video is going to show you how the machine was built, who built it, why they built it this way, and most importantly, the exact mechanisms through which control is maintained even as the system collapses. If you want to understand how the world actually works, if you want to see the structural truth behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment and tell me what stage you think we're actually in. Some of you will say stage 4 is already here. Some will argue we're still in stage 2. But the data tells a different story. The pattern tells a different story. History tells a different story. The warning is clear: 40% and rising. The question isn't whether the pattern completes. The question is whether you'll see it coming. Subscribe. Watch the next video. Understand the machine before it devours everything you've built.